Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and as the Steam Summer Sale continues, I'm here with yet another video to highlight some specific recommendations, this time focused on games that are under or just around the $10 mark. If you've got a slightly higher budget, you can check out the other video I've linked in the pinned comment below for 10 more recommendations, and as always, both that and this video focus on strategic and tactical games ranging from RTS and turn-based tactics to 4X, city building, colony management, and more. If you have recommendations of your own, don't hesitate to drop them in the comments below, but otherwise, with no more time to waste on an intro, and with timestamps down below, let's begin. Iron Harvest is a dieselpunk RTS set in the alt history universe of 1920+, similar to the board game Scythe if you're familiar with that, set during a brittle post-war peace featuring giant mechs fighting alongside foot soldiers for dominance on the battlefield. If you're curious about the development studio behind the upcoming Dawn of War 4, this is the game to play, and apart from that, if you're a fan of the Company of Heroes style of real-time strategy game, there's plenty to enjoy here across multiple single and multiplayer game modes. Anybody familiar with the games that inspired Iron Harvest will already know what to expect for the most part. Light base building, unit recruitment and management, cover-based combat mechanics, claiming weapons on the battlefield, and capturing resource generation points. But while you're doing all this familiar stuff, you'll also have the immense joy of bringing some absolutely stunning-looking mechs to the battlefield alongside more believable as well as fantastical infantry units that fit this alternate, gritty timeline. There's a lot of fun to be had here, and with a low player count, single-player gameplay is probably your best bet unless you can get a bunch of friends to dive in together, but don't let that stop you. There really is a lot to do in single-player, including a fairly expansive narrative campaign spread across the game's factions. I had an absolute blast with Iron Harvest when it first came out. The devs worked hard at supporting the game post-launch, and even now, years later, I think it's worth picking up to check out, especially at this price point. IXION was an extremely captivating sci-fi colony management game with a wild ride of a narrative-focused experience that I can highly recommend, even to people who don't necessarily care for the genre. This might just be what reels you in. Set in the not-too-distant future, you're put in charge of a station destined for distant stars in search of a potential new home for humanity as hope for Earth dwindles. Unfortunately, your departure harkens the apocalypse, and your mission of hope very quickly turns into one of desperation. As you travel the stars, though, it's quite clear that all isn't as it first seems, and strange encounters weave an interesting story of what actually happened. I don't want to give too much away when it comes to the story here, but suffice it to say, it's worth checking out for the narrative alone. But the game doesn't falter in other departments. Not only is it a visual treat with a soundtrack to die for, the game also has a bunch of unique ideas as it challenges you to maintain and grow a population of humanity's last hope, providing them with basic necessities like housing and food and water, as well as fulfilling more advanced needs like entertainment and faith, while engaging in research and the industrial manufacturing needed to keep your mission alive, literally and figuratively speaking. Build mining vessels to acquire ice and iron and more to help with your water production and agriculture and construction. Build science ships to engage with anomalies and story events, and use cargo ships to actually move goods and people around as needed. Expand the limited space you have on your station to house more and more people and functions, and prepare it for the dangerous journey ahead, traversing through storms and asteroid fields and worse in your quest for answers and a new home. IXION truly is something to behold and experience, and I can highly recommend picking it up. Jagged Alliance 3 absolutely knocked it out of the park to bring us a turn-based tactics game that feels like an action movie from the 80s with a colorful cast of characters, fresh systems and mechanics, and a legacy to live up to. You're put in charge of a mercenary company responsible not just for hiring mercs of different classes with matching skills and stats, managing their equipment to get the most out of them, and facilitating their ongoing training to ensure they're performing as you need, but also keeping tabs on their salaries and otherwise ensuring that they work well together as a group of misfits. The strategic layer has you traverse a grid-based map featuring villages to liberate, equipment stashes to loot, various sources of resources to capture, and enemy camps to clear. Enemy squads will roam the map as well, looking to intercept you or otherwise garrisoning locations and trying to recapture territories that you've liberated as part of your operation. As you move around this massive map, establishing yourself and accomplishing your assignment, you'll train the local population to help fight your enemies alongside your specialist mercenaries as well, adding extra layers of management and consideration at both strategic and tactical levels. The tactical layer itself involves real-time exploration that allows for stealthy approaches punctuated by action-packed combat where you meet a variety of characters, build and destroy relationships, and make decisions that have actual impacts on your campaign. Combat has you planning out ambushes and picking the enemy off to even out odds before you go loud, switching between firing modes for different pros and cons, if the weapons allow for it, and otherwise choosing specific body parts to target for similarly significant pros and cons every time you pull the trigger. And none of this feels cumbersome, instead all pushing for some intense do-or-die situations, especially in a game that is more than happy to punish an errant player. Jagged Alliance 3 hits all the right notes, innovates in some great ways, and has a great personality, all coming together to make for an easy recommendation. Warhammer 40k Chaos Gate Daemonhunters is probably one of my favorite turn-based tactics games from recent years, and whether you're a fan of the Warhammer 40k IP or not, I can strongly recommend checking it out if you're interested in a game that pulls no punches and hits all the right notes when it comes to tone, systems, and difficulty alike. What's more, the spiritual successor to this game, Chaos Gate Deathwatch, was just announced a few weeks ago, and spending under $10 to play its predecessor is a great way to figure out if the next game will be right for you too, since I see a lot of the same DNA between the two games. In Daemonhunters, you're in charge of a chapter of superhuman space marines that are known to hunt demons and their worshippers, and currently, a plague is spreading across the galaxy thanks to Nurgle, the god of plague. That's really all the context you need to have a good time, as on the strategic layer, your mission asks you to manage your ship and travel from planet to planet to prevent the plague from festering and spreading, growing stronger over time where you let it. You'll research new tech as well as the threat itself to help your cause, and you'll also invest in requisitioning new equipment for your soldiers through your successes in battle, with the game taking a rather different approach here to acquiring new weapons and armor and gear than the usual, falling into the lore a bit more to create an interesting format where you're not just relying on looting. Naturally, your success over time will also allow you to upgrade your Marines with skill trees made specifically for each of their classes, giving a bit more weight to who you bring on board and who you deploy to any given mission, not just because of how long they've been able to survive and get upgrades for, but also because of what combinations of classes any given mission benefits from. On the battlefield, you'll deal with a lot of the familiar mechanics and tropes of the genre: grid-based, cover-based movement, action points, Overwatch systems, so on and so forth. But Daemonhunters makes the environment a powerful tool on the battlefield to an extent I haven't seen done before, at least not this well, and it also keeps things interesting by leaning into plague and mutation mechanics that'll change things up on the battlefield from time to time based on how quickly you operate in any given mission, giving each combat scenario some interesting twists and turns. Above all, what I love most is that it's a challenging game, and it will absolutely test your prowess. This is one I can always highly recommend. Fabledom is a great little city builder with fairy tale vibes that introduces some very fresh ideas to the genre in integral ways, not just to add a bit of flavor here and there, but to fundamentally influence your decision making. Not only will you be building a slowly growing village into a bustling city, going through tiers of buildings, looking after the needs and wants of your citizens, and busying yourself with optimal layouts, decoration, and all the other usual expectations of the genre, but you'll also be interacting with quests and storylines taken right out of classic tales, and you'll engage with a core aspect of many a fairy tale: love and romance. So while you'll train soldiers and send them out on quests, you'll also be interacting with other rulers in search of relationships that can impact how your kingdoms develop together or apart. Romance actually integrates into city building here. As I said earlier, these fairy tale elements are not just tacked on as an afterthought, and it's really quite awesome to see this intersection of ideas be pulled off so well, with the romance between princes and princesses providing various kinds of mechanical buffs, as well as unique structures to bolster your city's productivity in one way or another. With flying pigs, dragons, and happily ever afters to go with its military layer and socioeconomic simulations, this is an easy buy for anybody looking for a slightly more relaxed city building experience with some very, very fresh ideas to enjoy. Frostpunk is a game you'll have heard me recommend many times if you follow the channel. It's a genre-defining game when it comes to survival city builders, and honestly remains one of the best in class, significantly different from the second game to the point where it's still worth owning the first one. But apart from the base game being super cheap right now, you can actually get it and all the DLC all together for less than $10, and I can definitely recommend doing so as the DLC adds new scenarios to play through, further fleshing out the narrative of the world and the challenges it brings. Set in an alternate timeline where an ice age gripped and destroyed the world in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, you're in charge of a small group of survivors trying to, well, survive. The game makes full use of the setting and its twists, adding temperature as a core consideration when planning your layouts, and even giving you forewarning about significant temperature dips to come so you can take the right precautionary methods, weighing their pros and cons accordingly. Beyond that, you need to take care of other basic needs like housing and food, researching more advanced ways to meet said needs, and you'll also need to deal with more existential threats like the loss of hope. As all this is going on, you'll be able to send scouting parties out to investigate the frigid wilderness, and you'll also find yourself making policy decisions that impact your survivability and the people's trust in you, from keeping the children in the mines to help with productivity, to taking shortcuts when it comes to access to healthcare and food. There are real dilemmas here to weigh and consider, each of them with very real consequences. Frostpunk was and still is a phenomenal experience, and the DLC is also gripping, especially, in my personal opinion, the last autumn. At this price point, it's all an easy purchase to make. The next few games I'd like to recommend are published by Hooded Horse, so I just wanted to quickly remind you that outside of this channel, I am affiliated with Hooded Horse. That's not to say they sponsor any of my videos or ask me to cover any of their games, but I do want to mention it for the sake of transparency. The reason I'm affiliated with them is because I like the games they publish, and many of the games I've actually already covered on the channel before said affiliation anyway, so it shouldn't be a surprise that their games come up here on the channel from time to time. For more information about all of this, check out the video linked in the description below. But moving on, first up, Battle Brothers is a game I've recommended over and over again, and the devs make it exceptionally easy to do so when they continue to drop updates to the game even so long after its release, with the latest update having dropped just a couple of weeks ago. A genre-defining game that really set the bar for tactical RPGs right out the gate, Battle Brothers has you leading a mercenary band in a low-fantasy world, traveling across the procedurally generated map to go from town to town to pick up additional recruits, trade equipment, or grab quests that send you chasing all manner of trouble ranging from bandits to beasts. Explore crypts and ruins and camps, secure powerful loot, and level up your brothers based on their natural aptitudes, with a great variety of backgrounds and traits, keeping things tremendously interesting, more so than most games, even those released in more recent years, at least in my opinion. Combat here is also brutal and clever in ways I've not seen elsewhere. Hex-based battlefields with obstacles and height advantage considerations is one thing, but the way damage to armor and HP is managed and how injuries can temporarily or permanently maim warriors adds interesting considerations. And then, as you play more of the game, you start realizing some fascinating opportunities and options to explore. Of course, bludgeoning weapons work better against fleshless skeletons compared to stabbing weapons, but did you expect that there's an enemy that you're better off fighting butt naked? How do you plan for when another enemy type just eats your soldiers whole? And do you take the risk of using daggers to find gaps in armor when fighting dangerous foes just to keep their armor undamaged and lootable? Great way to get advanced equipment early, but also a great way to end your career bruised and broken. And when you're not trying to keep it together under all this stress, you've got random events and apocalyptic situations to worry about too. Battle Brothers is easily hundreds of hours of gameplay, if not thousands, and I can recommend both it and all its DLC without a moment's hesitation. Workers and Resources Soviet Republic is my absolute favorite city builder of all time, no question about it. I have never seen any other come close to replicating its layers of complexity, and no other city builder feels nearly as satisfying when everything clicks together. Take command of an impoverished Eastern Bloc nation and lead it to prosperity across decades, managing literally everything through a command economy. Not only will you determine, for example, where individual houses or industrial buildings are placed, but you'll connect them to power and water and sewage, and you might think that that's par for the course, but then you realize that you're managing throughput as power goes from generator to substation, needing to worry about brownouts and blackouts, or how you need to worry about the slope of a pipe because water can't fight gravity unless you specifically build the occasional pump to do so. And unless you're playing with the most beginner-friendly difficulty settings, it's not like these pipes and electrical towers sprout out of thin air. They need to be built just like any other building or piece of infrastructure. You need to acquire the construction materials, ship them to the construction sites, and then bring laborers and construction equipment over to actually build everything. This takes time, money, and above all, workers and resources. And this level of involvement exists across damn near everything. How do you build roads? What about dirt roads versus proper asphalt roads? Or perhaps you make do with gravel roads until you can acquire the more advanced equipment and resources needed to make those asphalt roads. And that's just roads. But what about trash? Where does the trash go in a residential neighborhood? How does it get then collected to incinerate or perhaps export away? Or do you sort it to recycle it into construction material? Do you buy your cars and buses and trains and trams and airplanes from NATO or Warsaw Pact nations? Or do you build them yourself? Where do you get the electronics and iron and plastics and fabrics to do so? Import or manufacturing? But each of these goods have entire production chains and industrial buildings that need constructing to produce them, and all this construction has all the same considerations as before. What kind of raw materials do you need? How do you bring them to the construction site? How do you bring laborers to the construction site? So on and so forth. And then, once you're actually producing the goods, how do you move them around? They need to be transported in appropriate vehicles. And this and that and so much more to consider. My goodness, I could go on for hours talking about all the levels of complexity here. Managing congestion is child's play compared to what workers and resources asks you to do. And the thing is, it's not just complexity for complexity's sake. It is all extremely thought through and very engaging. And sure, you can lower difficulty settings and learn all these bits and pieces piecemeal, but eventually, playing with all these details to consider, it really is something else. Feel free to watch the over 300 hours of gameplay already on this channel first if it helps you make a decision, but honestly, I can highly recommend you check it out. Old World is a historical 4X game set during the classical era, featuring nations from around the Mediterranean, with DLC adding more from near and far, as far in fact as the Indian subcontinent. With a great selection of civilizations in the base game alone though, there's plenty to explore, including an interesting blend of role-playing where you need to concern yourself with individual characters, dynastic survival, attributes, traits, education, roles in military and political positions, and interpersonal relationships alike. Beyond that, Old World also takes an interesting approach to the tech tree, introducing some unpredictability by offering a bit of shuffling every step of the way rather than predictable linear progression. And it also takes an interesting approach to actually leading your units, where a limited number of orders can be spread across the entire growing empire, representing the limiting bureaucratic strain on a growing polity. It's all very clever stuff, and I haven't even touched on how each faction needs to manage internal family politics, handing cities off to families to manage, keeping their opinions of the head of the nation positive to avoid civil war and schisms along familial lines, while also trying to secure the buffs that individual families provide. Fight barbarians and minor factions, engage in relationship-based diplomacy with other major factions, and rule the old world through the use of powerful characters, shrewd politics, and careful tactical decision-making in times of war and peace alike. Old World does a lot of very interesting things for the genre, innovative in all kinds of ways, and it does them very well. I can highly recommend checking it out. Rebel Inc. is a very interesting take on real-time strategy from the folks behind Plague Inc., taking you to a fictional nation on the other side of a conflict. You're put in charge of the restoration efforts of the region, needing to invest your limited budget across all kinds of outreach, PR, infrastructure, and military efforts to get the locals on your side while shutting down insurgent activity. You are, ultimately, an invading force here, and if you're going to claim to be a liberator, you need to make some serious efforts. Lots of moving parts come together here as you need to consider each region's specific needs to determine how best to pursue your objectives, and at the same time, you need to worry about inflation caused by overinvestment and corruption that ebbs and flows as more money is poured into your efforts. International pressure and your reputation both play a key role in determining your growing or shrinking budget over the years, and even your own military assets aren't entirely your own as you juggle coalition forces that'll eventually want to go home and local forces that are slower and weaker until you've poured a lot of money into improving them. The military aspects are all very unique here too, and admittedly, a bit simple for the most part, having you simply move troops strategically through mountain passes and urban and rural environments alike to encircle and eliminate threats when they arise, because they would otherwise slip out and attack adjacent regions in an attempt to destabilize them further and cause setbacks to your efforts. Multiple maps with different regional breakdowns and requirements, assistance and modifiers to unlock with progress, and features like leaderboards and regularly refreshing challenges make Rebel Inc. very replayable. And if you're looking for a game about war that's a little different from the usual and perhaps a little more mechanically light, this is definitely one to try. There you have it, folks. 10 games available for less than or just around $10 during the Steam Summer Sale that I think are well worth picking up. Feel free to drop your own recommendations in the comments below, and for a selection of games with slightly higher price points on sale that are also worth grabbing, check out the video linked on screen right now. Otherwise, as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly, and of course a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.